Hello, hello. Live streaming from the backup channel, and I'm going to give it a minute to see if anybody gets a notification. If you have, thank you for subscribing to the new channel. I'll just give it a moment. I'm going to read the article I told you about, and we'll see how long it will take to read. Maybe I can do it in one live stream reading. Possible. Okay, I wanted to make sure everything was live on Facebook. Okay, so I'll begin. And the article that I'm reading is actually a newsletter. And the newsletter is from the African Diaspora Archaeology newsletter. So let me put it on the screen. Okay, so I'll make it bigger. Okay, so you can see it, and this will be saved to the new backup channel. Okay. African Diaspora Archaeology Newsletter, Volume 13, Issue 3, dated September 2010, Article 4. A thatched cabin on Cumberland Island, Georgia. This is by Mary R. Bullard. And like I said, she did excellent work on this art with this newsletter, and her citations are really good. So I put a link to the article for anyone who wants to read it or print it out. Okay. And again, this is a scholarly work from the University of Massachusetts, would be where Mary published through. Okay. There's a psalm here. I'll read that. I wait for the Lord, my soul waits, and in his word I hope. My soul waits for the Lord more than watchmen for the morning. So that's from Psalm 130, verse 6. And this is the contents here. So I'll go through. 1 right now, a thatched cabin. Number 2 is Primus Mitchell. 3, Cumberland's Great Inland Swamp. 4, Cumberland in wartime. 5, post-war problems. 6, Primus's religion. 7, interpretation of stereo view. 8 is the conclusion and the references and cited extras, appendixes, and things like that. So let me see if anybody has joined in. Wow. Hello, Lori. Welcome, and Mish. So glad you can join for this this reading of the article. So I hope you sit back and enjoy. This will be very scholarly for us to continue. And I want to get your feedback and the things that you put together regarding one of our favorite places. A lot of us have grown to love Cumberland Island, Georgia, and we came to know about it because of JFK Jr.'s wedding on the island. All right. So, and share, please subscribe and share. All right. So we'll go into a thatched cabin. And let me know if everything sounds good on your end. Are we good with the sound? And thanks for joining if you're joining from Facebook. So is the sound good? I'll wait to hear from someone. Are we good? Okay, thanks, Mish. Okay, I'll go on. It all started with the scene shown in figure 1. Let me go to figure 1, okay? I'm going to do it slowly so I'm not scrolling too. So this is figure 1, okay? I want you to take that in. This is the thatched roof cabin that will be the center of a lot of this article, okay? Okay. So again, it all started with the scene shown in figure 1. While viewing photographs in the print department of the New York Historical Society in October 1987, I came across an eye-catching, undated stereo view. Handwritten on its reverse side was Camden County off Georgia coast and Thatched Cabin, Cumberland Island. No photographer was credited. The photo bears 2 different handwritings, one in ink and one in pencil. And it has here Wendy Shadwell, curator of prints, New York Historical Society, Pers Com, 1987. There was no backlist on the picture, which would typically consist of commercial information printed on the reverse side of such an image. I immediately noticed the cabin's outstanding attribute, as had the unknown photographer. A fairly small frame cabin, seemingly one room, standing in an undistinguished open field, was roofed with a thick cover of thatch. The luxuriant thatch covered not only the roof, but also the cabin's exterior walls. On the exterior, at one end of the cabin stood a chimney flue covered with large wooden shingles. The opening of the chimney stack was level with the roof tree, or even slightly below it. A low central door faced the photographer and presumably served as the cabin's main entrance. A wooden door-like construction stood at its side, abutting the exterior wall. In the background gleams what appears to be a small whitewashed building. In the foreground can be seen several low tabby walls. The roof thatching hung down far enough to obstruct passage through the door. Thatch over the door had been distinctively trimmed into a crescent-shaped cut. An extensive heap of oyster shell spills across the near foreground of the stereograph. Initially, the shell heap reminds one of a Timucuan shell midden, of which there are many on this island. The only date immediately associated with this stereograph was its accession date, 1960 to 61. No recorded evidence provided a date for the image. This stereograph is presented on an unprinted yellow-orange mount card. The albumin stereo image has rounded corners set within the square-cornered and flat mound card. The stereograph can be dated to some degree by comparative studies of that card mount. Professional archivists estimate that it dates from the 1850s to the mid-1870s. Figure 2 presents another stereo view, identical to Figure 1. But this stereo view has a backlist on the reverse side, which states the stereo view was created and sold by Ingle and Furlong. The backlist describes the structure as a thatched hut, but it provides no geographic placement. And here's a picture. So this is Figure 3. Primus, Mitchell, and Amanda, his wife. So this is, it says CA 1910, Private Album Collection, Cumberland Island Scenes. So I'll let you look at that for a bit to take this in. Primus and Amanda Mitchell will be central to this story. Okay. Figure 3 presents a photograph of another thatched roof cabin on the same island. This photograph is identifiable, labeled snapshot of a man named Primus Mitchell and his wife Amanda, likely taken around 1910. This image came from a photo album whose many pictures, none of which are stereo views, are either dated in ink lettering or by specific recorded evidence. The two cabins in Figures 1 and 3 are not the same building. Primus, however, definitely knew them both. Primus was a preacher, and he was protecting his church as he understood it. He awaited a real minister who would come. Primus was of Gullah Geechee heritage and was born into slavery on a Sea Island plantation in Georgia. Gullah is a word denoting ethnic and linguistic attributes of African Americans in the Sea Island regions of Georgia and the Carolinas. Geechee is sometimes used to describe the Georgia area in particular. Primus was born and died on Cumberland Island, and very likely spoke Gullah Geechee, a Creole type of English. Many plantations had rudimentary structures where the gullahs could hold prayers and praise on weekday evenings as well as Sundays. Generally speaking, Northerners were appalled at the conditions of the praise houses. For Black Cumberland Baptists, the praise house somewhat resembled a plantation community hall where they related secular experiences, directed their religious lives, and openly expressed among each other their innermost frustrations. White brethren had duties and had need of frequent reminders about carrying them out. Resignations were frequent. Baptist church discipline kept alive. So this is figure 4, example of a surviving praise house structure on St. Helena Island, South Carolina. So again, Baptist church discipline kept alive the heavenly pattern which each church personified. Discipline committees typically met once a month. The thatched cabin, shown in figure 3, was very likely a praise house familiar to Primus. While the locations of other such praise houses are unknown, others likely existed on the island. Similarly, a cemetery for the enslaved laborers was almost surely present on Cumberland Island, but has not yet been located. Originally, I thought that perhaps when the cabin was photographed, repairs on the main road were underway, possibly involving a bridge. To repair bridges, their access roads had to be improved, and oyster shell would have been gathered for this purpose. Crushed shell was a typical useful material for use in road repairs. The apparent midden heaps of crushed shells in the foreground of figure 1 appear to be in the process of being prepared for reuse. Oyster shells provide excellent drainage, and they provided very good fill material for filling ruts and depressions. In figure 1, it looks as if some tabby blocks had been hauled to the cabin site and deposited there, possibly to provide material to be broken up and used in such road repairs. Structural remains of tabby walls still stand on Cumberland Island. So here's a photograph for figure 5, photograph showing tabby blocks used in walls on Cumberland Island. So it has a date of 1901. So tabby has good compressive strength, and exposure to air hardens it. However, prolonged immersion in water causes its slow erosion and dissolution. Dr. Lauren B. Sickles Tavez has made similar observations. After testing original tabby from the Cumberland Island National Seashore for the National Park Service. So this is figure 6. We're looking at oyster shells, raw material for tabby. And if you're just joining, I want to say thank you. Hey, Christine and Sean, welcome. Thank you for joining me on the new backup channel. All right. So, wait a minute. Okay, here I am. The building shown in figure 3 held special significance for Primus. The cabin possessed an intangible value not easily photographed. As an unlicensed Baptist minister, Primus would have been more than willing to open his dwelling as a church. Church attendance was part of his upbringing. Church was a place where he and his colleagues could meet, hold services, and hope to make sense of post-war conditions. The thatched roof cabin shown in figure 1 also may have been significant to him. Where on Cumberland Island was it located, and when was the stereo view in figure 1 taken? Closer examination of the photograph shown in figure 1 yielded new data. What initially appeared to be a whitewashed building in the background turns out to be a man's undershirt and socks hung out to dry. Magnification also showed the thatch to have been made of palmetto, not grass. A peculiarity of the cabin is its thatched roof. Although thatched dwellings are not uncommon generally, in the period of the 1940s to 1970s, distribution of such building methods was primarily in the coastal southeast of the United States, an area which had by 1865 undergone a critical sectional war. Generally speaking, the newly emancipated slaves underwent extreme economic hardship. Even the poorest Black family, however, did not customarily use thatch. Although in the hot and humid climate of summertime coastal Georgia, the thermal qualities of thatch actually had many advantages. The roofs frequently caught fire. Now, here's a picture to give you an idea of the salt grass. So, figure 7 here is an example of local salt grass. The thatching visible in the 2 cabin photographs in figures 1 and 3 turns out to consist of 2 different plants. The roof in figure 3 is made of palmetto, a type of tree. The roof in figure 1 is sedge, a grass. Both plants are common on the Georgia Sea Islands. Sedge, the name for any one of various rush or grass-like plants constituting the genus Carex, is found in Tidewater, Georgia, in any one of 3 coastal zones. First, next to the highland is the high marsh border, defined as infrequently or rarely flooded. Black rush, salt meadow cordgrass, milk vine, sea lavender, and American three-square bulrush grow there. Next comes the salt marsh habitat, land found between the island, highland, and the tidal creeks. The salt marsh zone is dominated by smooth cordgrass, and there is a third zone, the grass standing furthest away from the island's highland. Here is the salt marsh grass forb rush habitat, the one generally used by barrier islanders for their thatching sedge. You have to get your feet wet to obtain thatching sedge, and people make use of the daily tides to gather it. This grass community includes bigelow glasswort, saltgrass, saltwater bulrush, nutgrass, black rush, and sea lavender. Seagrasses with these strange and lovely names provided thatch free for the gathering. Timing was very important. The tall marsh grass must be cut when it is green. If it is cut too early, the thatch will be too short. If too late, the thatch will be insufficiently pliable. Once gathered and trimmed to a suitable size, tied bundles were laid over the roof tree, somewhat like towels over a rack. Thatching roofs tended to be a family affair. Men mounted ladders. Women and children carefully gathered the long, straight bundles and handed them up. In about 2 years, a thatched roof will need repair, and the process will begin again. Thatching provides shade and shelter. It is free and may usually be gathered for the asking, and it is easily repaired. But when used near the ever-present dangers of hearths and flues, dried thatch is dangerous and thoroughly combustible. Most all Sea Island inhabitants were capable of constructing thatch roofs using old-time methods in coastal Georgia that dated back to the mid-18th century and much earlier if Timacuan occupation is taken into account. Oglethorpe had encouraged village construction at Fort Frederica and Cumberland for his soldiers' families. A Native American spy reported in 1738 that the British huts had thatched roofs. The dwelling shown in Figure 3 could have been any one of the thatch roof cabins at Brick Hill, another Cumberland Island settlement, one in which Primus was known to have resided. In 1891, the cabins in the Brick Hill settlement were reported as housing Black settlers who still knew how to roof their homes with thatch. 19th century coastal dwellers interested in utilizing this inexpensive building material were apt to be 1. White property holders who wanted inexpensive roofing, 2. Black residents lacking title to the land on which they farm, 3. Children playing at marooners on the beach, 4. Some beach denizens, such as lighthousekeepers and Coast Guard rescuers, and oddly enough, 5. Mail carriers who sometimes used barrier beaches as thoroughfares for their postal rounds. Professional archaeologists have carefully examined both images. In their opinion, 2 different cabins were photographed. The images differ from one another in 2 important particulars. Not only does the thatch differ, but so does the flooring and door sill. So as you can see, like I said, she gives amazing references here. The cabin in figure 1 appears to use earth as its flooring. In figure 3, the flooring appears to consist of planking. Small-scale structures are difficult to classify. Anthropologists, in discussing fugitive communities, often distinguish between structures built by larger, more settled groups and those of smaller, more temporary groups. Members of this second category rarely build substantial houses. Many terms exist to describe dwellings built for rapidly moving groups, such as huts, hunting camps, lean-tos, tents, teepees, and champas. A more substantial house usually separates living from sleeping quarters. When a structure has open and diverse uses, one might call it a cabin. In 1882, a wealthy Pennsylvania family named Carnegie took over administration of the properties on Cumberland Island from the estate of a deceased antebellum planter. Figure 3 appears in an album containing photographs taken by members of this family and their numerous friends. Since the Carnegies did not arrive in the area until 1882, the cabin of figure 1 was not photographed by anyone in the Carnegie family. Stereo photographs are taken by means of a camera with 2 lenses. This provides 2 separate pictures, 2.5 inches apart, about the distance between the eyes. Although the pictures appear the same, when looked at in a viewer which has prismatic lenses, the 2 views will be blended by your eyes into one. The brain perceives it in 3 dimensions, as does normal vision. The source of the handwritten information on the stereo view in figure 1 remains unknown. The image may have been pirated. The numbering and distribution of stereo views is extremely confusing. Many companies kept poor records and did not number their views, or in some cases, doubled up on numbers from different sets. Some publishers titled duplicate photos with several card or boxed set variations, while others pirated views and negatives from rival photographers. Possible photographers for Figure 1 were Engel and Furlong of Fernandina, Florida, who later published the identical image for which the reverse side is shown in Figure 2. The location of the cabin depicted in Figure 1 was determined by examining additional evidence. From 1849 to 1870, the United States Coast Survey worked on the preparation of a baseline survey of its North Atlantic coastline. A baseline survey is a special kind of survey whose recorded measurements will be used in the base map for the larger survey when completed. Examining these records yields evidence that the geographic position of the thatched roof cabin in Figure 1 is latitude 30 degrees 53.729, north longitude 81 degrees 26 40.605, west, which places the cabin at Brick Hill Landing, a site on Cumberland Island, Camden County, Georgia. Brick Hill has been spelled in various ways on historical documents, and the name may derive from an historical function of the location, such as a kiln operating for making brick or lime. While this line of geographic evidence provides a partial explanation for the handwritten information on the mount of the stereo view shown in Figure 1, it does not explain why that photograph was taken. Although a surveyor and his party from the U.S. Coast Survey had placed markers about 20 feet from the cabin's chimney, they had not been ordered to photograph it. Sub-Assistant Franklin Pierce Weber, a government surveyor who was working for the U.S. Coast Survey, determined his fixed station in 1860. Those coordinates marked Weber's exact geographic position when he had completed placing markers for his station, Figure 8A. In a supplementary description, Weber recorded his station as follows: Downs, southernmost Negro house chimney, 1860 ND. The letters ND indicate that no description was provided for the station. Weber was recording geographic positions in order to complete work for a baseline survey. He was working on the triangulation of St. Simon's and St. Andrew's Sounds from December 5th, 1859 through April 12th, 1860. When he and his vessel reached New York, the chimney of the cabin in Figure 1 and in Weber's description stood in a clearing at Brick Hill Bluff near Cumberland's main north-south road, Figure 8D. The nearest road, hardly more than a well-traveled trail, was often flooded, Figure 8F. Bluffs in southeastern coastal Georgia are rarely high, and Brick Hill Bluffs is no exception, with a height ranging from 2 to 5 feet at normal high water. At high water, one can almost step ashore from the vessel. Because the depth at the landing is 4 fathoms, roughly 24 feet. Small sloops of the 18th century could easily sail right up to high land, the better to offload gear. Figure 8A here is example of standard disc station marker. And let me welcome anybody new. Tina, the Truth Seeker, is here. Welcome, welcome. Welcome, welcome. This will be the first content that I'm putting up on the back channel. Thank you for joining. So I'm reading the newsletter. Okay. Livestock and passengers. Water passage to the sea islands is blocked by the wide marshes, which are treaded by or threaded by tributary creeks. For small vessels, the difficulty lies in finding a creek leading to the landing place of choice. For larger vessels, failure to find the right creek means one's vessel may go aground. At low tide, the bluff is, of course, higher, and you get the beach slope leading up to a bluff with a maximum bluff height of maybe 10 feet. If you found the right spot at high tide, you could pretty well step over from the bow onto the bank. At the same time, the marshes hid Brick Hill Bluff from the inland passage, a chain of sounds, bays, and estuaries between the mainland and the sea islands, making a north-south waterway from South Carolina to St. Augustine, Florida. For small craft anxious to avoid the open sea. Hidden as it was by tall grass, sometimes 12 to 15 feet high. This landing place made a secure, safe harbor for small sloops and periaguas anxious to avoid unexpected encounters. In the great coastal marshes of Georgia, a bluff is a low bank of highland with a sharp profile. near which is little or no ground foliage. Deep water landings interested coastal Georgians, especially on the sea islands, whose western shores were shielded by almost impenetrable saltgrass marsh. So here you can see figure 8B is Brick Hill Bluff. This is dated 1870. The oval outlines the area of the cabin settlement. So I'll let you take a look at that. Okay. And here's another. This says figure 8C, coordinates of the Brick Hill settlement. So this is, you can see the coordinates here. So the United States Coast Survey of the government. And here is figure 8D, Brick Hill Bluff from a T-sheet. This image is from a Coast Survey map, also known as a topographic sheet or T-sheet. They are topographic maps of the coastal perimeter of the United States and its major rivers. And this is figure 8C, no, E, sorry, 8E, Brick Hill Bluff. So this is another map. And you can see the settlements, as they call it. And here's another map. This would be figure 8F, enlarged image of Brick Hill in 1808. Note the spelling of brick kiln for Brick Hill. Can you see that okay? How's it going in the chat? All right, I'll let you look at the image. All right, moving on. So now we're in part 2. Primus Mitchell. So we get to meet one of the central people when you think of Cumberland Island. I might call him the father, the founding father of Cumberland Island. Primus Mitchell. During the immediate post-Civil War months, some Sea Island freedmen like Primus Mitchell, born 1825, died 1915, went to a great deal of trouble to remain on Cumberland. Not all freedmen left their island. Even after their status changed from enslaved to free, many freedmen tried to remain. They believed they had permission to call the land they tilled their property, and they wished to remain at home. Primus desired to stay on Cumberland for additional reasons, which were peculiar why am I having problems with that word? Peculiarly his. So they were his own personal reasons, basically, right? He was an unlicensed preacher who very likely felt an obligation to his church. Primus was born into slavery on Rayfield Plantation. Rayfield was the name given to a small group of cotton fields on Cumberland Island that had been planted as early as 1802. Primus's first appearance in the historical record was in 1834, when he was about 9 years old. He appeared on a slave inventory named Prime, perhaps a name for a firstborn son. He grew up to become a field hand. In later life, Primus told people he was born as property of Robert Stafford at Rayfield. Primus's birth year was around 1825. If so, Primus was born as a slave owned by Nathaniel Greene, son of the famous deceased general. Primus's first appearance in documentary records was on a land conveyance between Greene and Stafford, when Greene sold Primus with the property called Rayfield. Stafford paid $11,000 for land and 53 slaves. The Rayfield plantation housed approximately 68 slaves in total. As Greene had sold 13 other laborers to Stafford the previous year, 1833. Because of the position of Primus's name in a slave inventory written below the name Judy, a young woman estimated age 21 or somewhat younger. I had thought Judy was either his mother or his sister. And from other evidence, I am now fairly certain then that Prime and Judah were siblings. Stafford, a prominent Cumberland planter, had 2 wives in succession who were enslaved African Americans. I think Judah was his second mistress. They were termed black and concubines by the definition then current in Georgia. Her children were sent by their father to free states well before the war. A white man from Rhode Island named Ethan Clark was Rayfield Plantation's administrator when Primus was born. Clark was not a complete success as a cotton planter. After an incident of some sort in 1829, Clark relinquished his Rayfield lease ahead of schedule to its owner, Greene. At that date, young Greene, having soundly renounced any further connection with slavery, departed with his wife and children for Rhode Island. His friend Stafford took over Rayfield's administration, including Greene's chattel property. Stafford purchased Rayfield 5 years later in 1834. In 1837, the Cumberland Island mail carrier mentioned a Baptist mission church built 2.5 miles north of Stafford's house. The mission church provided or proved to be a major influence in young Primus's life, age 12. I know of no other church for Cumberland's slave population. As a grown man, Primus was noticeably religious. Possibly Clark had failed to react to the request of enslaved workers at Rayfield for a meeting house, or perhaps Black Baptist elders had pressured planter Stafford, the new owner, to build them a praise house. In the early days of the 19th century, Black elders were still able to achieve meaningful pastoral participation. The continued existence of Cumberland's slave church may explain why, in post-bellum years, unlike many freedmen, Primus Mitchell did not permanently leave Cumberland Island. I think Mitchell considered the old church his responsibility and tried to protect it from intrusion and vandalism. Primus Mitchell remained on Stafford's plantation during the war. In 1863, Stafford reported that he had 17 slaves working for him. No doubt Stafford paid them. Primus was in his mid-30s at Stafford Plantation when Confederate guerrillas, irregular forces to be sure, but armed, imperious, and dangerous, landed in 1862 and again in 1863 on the island. They entered Stafford Plantation to rob it of food and stored cotton. Such armed intrusions were often designed to capture slaves. I feel certain that Stafford made every effort to help Mitchell and his family absent themselves during these raids. On March the 2nd, 1862, awe-struck Cumberland residents watched the arrival of Union forces as Commodore Samuel Francis DuPont's naval squadron steamed and sailed into Fernandina Harbor. The U.S. Army and Navy took over the city on March 3rd through 5th. On March 7th, 1862, a small band of contraband, about 15 persons, including children, from Cumberland, entered Union lines at Fernandina. They entered shortly after the arrival of the Union squadron. The whole group declared itself Stafford property. Almost surely they were seeking Union protection from Stafford's guerrilla attackers. A group referred to as the Mitchell Group consisted of 8 people. Primus Mitchell was not among them. The Mitchell Group consisted of Amanda Mitchell, age 24, accompanied by Katerina Mitchell, age 5, Dorothy Mitchell, age 8, Amanda's sister, Eve Mitchell, age 26, and Eve's man, John Elwood, age 28. The next 3 are offspring, but there is no good way to determine whether they belong to Amanda or Eve. Since hatred of Stafford seems not to have been their chief motivation, possibly fear of kidnapping by Confederate raiders, Stafford's principal enemies at this time, prompted them to go to Fernandina in 1862. In such a decision, Stafford, a pragmatic man, assuredly made every effort to assist them. Between 1862 and 1864, an informal black settlement developed at Dungeness. Orders had been given in 1862 by Commodore DuPont to protect the mansion and property belonging to the descendants of General Nathaniel Greene, and a guard from Fernandina that had been sent to watch over it. Rations were sent from Fernandina for the guard and, in 1864, for refugees camping around the big house. They had rounded up some of Cumberland's open range livestock to pen them within the famous Dungeness Gardens. Dungeness served as an emerging marketplace for famished African Americans among the contraband groups. Desirable land for the new class of agriculturalists meant areas which they knew from experience were zones where successful market crops could be raised. Primus and his peers did not hope to plant cotton. They were rediscovering the commercial value of their homegrown crops. Their gardens could earn them money. Food staples below ground belonged to the landowner. Food staples growing above ground were, of course, available for the picking. Contraband successfully harvested crops to sell to willing customers. The Union squadron had already benefited from the agricultural skills of contrabands. 2 contrabands from Sapelo Island, Old Billy and Uncle Allie, made their appearance at 4 p.m. in a dugout, having sweet potatoes, pumpkins, etc. to sell. Their goods met with a ready sale. Dr. Boyer, a naval surgeon, reported buying and savoring peanuts, a popular item from St. Catherine's Island, turnips, corn, and honey. Dugout canoes carrying these delicious items to Union vessels disposed of their cargo in a short time. On October 23, 1863, several officers returned from a tramp upon Sapelo Island, perfectly delighted with their stay. Old Sampson reports that all their crops were splendid. Corn by the 100 bushels, pumpkins by the cartload, and potatoes, sweet, plenty, to supply nearly all creation. The officers returned carrying sacks of peaches, figs, and watermelons. The mess cooks serving up a dinner for the gentlemen of fresh beef, potatoes, cornbread, and eggs were applauded. One Georgia ex-slave recalled that the St. Simon's colony consisted of numerous small settlements, just like little villages. Despite fear of Confederate attack, women and children were free to move about at will and engage in social activities forbidden during slavery. On St. Simon's, Sapelo, St. Catherine's, Ossabaw, and elsewhere, agricultural operations centered around food production and were apparently conducted on both a collective and an individual basis. The formerly enslaved combined subsistence farming with limited cash transactions in ways in which harkened back to their previous commercial dealing in the rural South. They frequently sold vegetables and poultry to the crews of nearby warships, and the women took in sailors' washing to earn extra money. Food production was an important function of these villages. Special Orders 15, establishing the Sherman Reservation, January 16th, 1865, specified that freedmen could request permission to settle an island or an area of land within this reservation when 3 respectable Negroes, heads of families, came together for that purpose. Once the inspector of plantations and settlements, as Sherman designated the officer in charge of the area and of the process by which the former slaves would settle it, approved the request, the freedmen could claim their land and subdivide it among themselves and any other freedmen who wished to settle near them, allotting no more than 40 acres of tillable ground to each family. A special census of 1865 showed colored persons, presumably refugees, on Amelia Island. On it were Primus, 40 years old, and his wife Amanda, 30 years old, with 2 daughters, Dorothy, 8, and Catherine, 6. This special census also showed his friend Rogers Alberti, 40 years old, his wife Ellen, 24, and their son William. Listed immediately after Mitchell and Alberti were the Weber and Price families, headed by Craig Weber, 40 years old, his wife Esther, 24, and their daughter Barbara, 5, and by Calvin Pierce, 45, his wife Maria, 44, Sarah Samuel, 26, possibly their daughter with her son Theodore, 10, and their daughter Lucinda, 8. Mitchell Alberti, Craig Weber, and Calvin Price were exactly the sort of respectable African Americans that white planters and federal officers were would encourage to settle near the fertile soils of Cumberland's great inland swamp. Family men and agriculturalists who knew how to plant food crops. Alberti's wife, Allen, was a Cumberland Islander from an industrious family. All four men were friends of one another. They stood next to each other to register for this census. They are in the same age group, and all are family men. Primus Mitchell and Rogers Alberti were to remain lifelong friends. Three of them, Alberti, Weber, and Mitchell, gave Stafford as the name of their former owner. Price, naming no former master, said his family was free. Here is a picture of Rogers Alberti, and this is dated 1920 on Cumberland Island. And I want to say that when I went to Cumberland Island in 2020, I was not able to get to these areas, like I said, and I met some people on the island. I visited where the woman who planned JFK Jr.'s wedding, one of his friends, she wasn't on island the time that I went, but I met her brother and we talked for a while. And her brother mentioned a lady named Beulah Alberti that lived in, he called, the area a settlement for Black, Native Islanders. And I wanted to meet her. She would be a living oral historian. However, I'm not sure if she's still alive. I've been calling around and I haven't been able to get that information. And when I went to do a search for Beulah Alberti, I wasn't able to find any information. If anybody out there happens to know if Beulah Alberti is still alive, please let me know. And I would love to contact her or anyone that has this type of oral history. So it turns out that this man, we're looking at the picture right here, Rogers Alberti, that would be her, I believe, grandfather, Beulah. So I want you to just take this in. This would be Primus's best friend, lifelong friend. There were three heads of families, or a few family heads. These are men that are agriculturalists, and they live in a what I would say they practice cooperative economics. So that is figure 9. So section 3 is Cumberland's Great Inland Swamp. Primus's church was the Cumberland African Church, established in 1837, built with Nightingale and Stafford's approval. At its inception, this Baptist mission served as a small biracial church. It was very likely built on Track 7. At that time, there was no other church on the island, although services may have been held at Dungeness House when the Nightingale family was in residence. Its site was doubtless selected because of its proximity to water. The outflow long ago straightened and deepened to become a canal, may have held associations for Primus of baptism through immersion as an essential part of spiritual rebirth for Baptists. Damming the canal would have been quite possible. A former Virginia slave reported on immersion at his plantation. They dammed up the creek on Saturday so as it would be deep enough on Sunday. At dem baptizings, there was all sorts of shouting, and they would sing, "Roll, Jordan, roll, the living waters," and "Lord, I's coming home." This particular planting area abutted Cumberland's valuable inland swamp. So desirable was inland swamp acreage that the very first Crown grantees sought land grants there as early as 1765. Local residents' utilization of this inland swamp, as shown by its numerous canals, banks, and ditches, dates back to the 1770s, when an entrepreneurial family named Lynch from South Carolina tried to regulate its drainage for rice production. Tracks 6 through 7 included a large portion of the inland swamp. For over 2 centuries, agriculturalists have been draining what are still called old and new swamp fields. As a result, about 2.5 miles of artificial canals have been excavated, enabling plantation owners to utilize the rich soil of Cumberland's inland swamp. Tract 7's southernmost portion, which contained about 1,500 acres crisscrossed by relic banks, is still called Bank Field. So here is Figure 10, the Great Inland Swamp, dated 1802. The dark, irregularly shaped area marks Great Inland Swamp on an 1802 map of Cumberland. Its drainage indicated here by a stream from the swamp flowing into Brick Hill River. It's fresh water until it comes up against saline water brought by the daily incoming tide. How are you all doing? Everybody's doing good. Thanks for joining. Okay, so typically, rice was grown in inland swamps, usually fed by a brackish tidal stream, by accumulating water in a reservoir, then releasing the stored water for the irrigation of fields as required during the growing season. Fields were then alternately drained and refilled as required by the various stages of growing and weeding. Weeds and grass were suppressed by saltwater flooding. While Lynch owners doubtless had ordered clearing and flooding Cumberland's inland swamp in preparation for rice planting, this long and cruelly fatiguing task was interrupted by the American Revolution. and rice production never became much of a money crop on this island. Instead, the Green family ownership invested in cotton was profitable with profitable results. Inland swamps tend to have natural drainage systems. These natural drainage systems were called outflows, streams. When the season has been a wet one, or when the inland swamp is saturated, outflows make road travel difficult. The island, a slender, elongated body of land, has only one north-south road. Where an outflow crosses the road, its rapidly flowing stream eventually causes washouts. Old Swamp Field is a freshwater wetland containing 4 springs. Smaller patches of freshwater wetland dot the agricultural areas of Cumberland. Many are fed by natural springs. When saturated, these patches overflow. When the outflows cross the main road, the resulting watery places, which can be quite deep, can be further deepened by incoming tidal streams. Cumberland's main road has always been important to island residents. Although numerous trails exist, there is no other north-south road. To travel directly from one end of the island to the other, the traveler takes either the main road or the beach. Occasionally, the torrential summer rains of southeastern Georgia create impassable washouts, which cannot be forded or detoured. Where an outflow crosses the main road, small bridges or culverts are necessary. The slippery passage through the stream bed is risky for mule or ox-hauled wagons. With the onset of war repairs on the main road slowed down or ceased. So this is figure 11, tidal stream at half tide on Cumberland's main road. How are we doing? Still hanging? Thomas Carnegie, brother of steel magnate, made his initial purchase in this region in 1881. Photographs of Primus and Amanda were taken by members of this family. The Carnegies were quite unfamiliar with the American South. They knew little of the inheritance bequeathed by slavery. Primus to them was little more than an elderly man, affable and voluble. When the Carnegies first met Mitchell in the mid-1880s, he lived near the Stafford outflow, very close to the canal, just a few feet away from it. The Carnegies thought Primus lived at Bank Field. Primus lived in a rickety old cabin beyond the bridge in Banks Field. Clearly remembering Primus's cabin, they were unequivocal about its location. Once Primus and Amanda came over when we were having a picnic and talked with us. Nan laughed as she recollected how her whole family watched Amanda covertly extending an almost prehensile big toe to reach a silver spoon which had fallen to the ground, only to see its owner retrieve it at the last possible moment. Primus talked in a gabbling sort of way, said Lucy. He was a good man, recollected Nan. He was crazy, said Lucy. Island blacks believed his wife Amanda was a witch and took good care to stay out of her way. Mitchell was among the 17 persons reported as laborers at Stafford Plantation during wartime. Although Mitchell's peers were reluctant to submit to white control, he personally was not unwilling to work for Stafford. As freedman, Mitchell knew Bank Field, adjacent to Big Old Field, already cleared, was eminently suitable for growing the small plot of corn, melon, and okra he planted. Hunting and fishing would take up the balance of Mitchell's time. He could preside over his church. Perhaps the church, through Primus, could once more find a deacon. The exact location of Stafford's main provision fields remains unknown. A provision field is the area where plantation administrators provided space to grow food for enslaved personnel. Little is known of Cumberland's agricultural layout, and one can only suppose much of it was planted for home consumption. Of that amount, some was for humans and some became fodder. And this is where I'll stop and pick back up for part 4. And I'll let you know when I will mainstream the next part and finish this article. So thank you so much for hanging out with me for a first content upload for this new backup channel. Thank you. Hey, Nancy. Nancy says, my name is Carnegie, but I don't think I'm related to any of the rich ones. Okay, Nancy, that's that. Hey, listen, if you have Carnegie in your name, I would think that you should. We're going to talk about the Carnegies because yeah, this is very interesting, and I won't give too much commentary while I'm reading, but I do have some commentary to do post reading. Okay, so take good care. Love you all. Please share, like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications so you'll know when I upload the next part of this. Hopefully it'll be the rest of it. I can do it all in one thing. Okay, so take good care, and I will see you soon. Take care. Bye.